All right, we're in Genesis chapter 2 now. Much misinterpretation here. All it takes is a little misreading, and you go so far off. It's like an airplane. It's 1 degree off on its path, and by the time it gets to its destination, it's hundreds of miles away. That's what happens here. Just misread something just a little bit, draw a bad conclusion, and then keep supporting that bad conclusion, and you don't even have what the Bible says. So, we have Genesis chapter 1 is this address. Look for the word TOLEDOTHS. It's an English transliteration of the pronunciation of the Hebrew word for generations. So in Genesis 2:4a, let's look down there and see what it says. These are the accounts of the heavens and the earth when they were created. The word also means generations. So, the Hebrew word transliterated TOLEDOTHS, rendered generations in the sense of accounts of, is the pivotal word in Genesis 2:4a. A is the first part of it. B, you see, which by way of a summary statement concludes the context of the 6 days of chapter 1, not moving into chapter 2 as if it's a different account. And when we have 2 different accounts, people say they conflict, so we can throw the Bible out. After which, chapter 2, beginning with Genesis 2:4b, turns to details of, listen to this, what had already occurred in chapter 1. More details about the same thing. In a movie, a Western opens up, you see a panoramic view of the mountains and the desert, or whatever trees in this opening movie of a desert, of a Western. And then the camera pans in on some riders riding through a small path through this mountain path. It's telling you the same thing, but now getting more detail. Thus the heavens and the earth and all the host of them are finished. Oops, let me get back down to the right size. That's the imperfect tense. And God completed by the 7th day his work which he had made, and rested on the 7th day from all his work which he had made. Then God blessed the 7th day and sanctified it, because in it he rested from all of his work which God had created and made. Literally, to make. Notice what we're doing here. We're going back and reviewing the verses that lead up to the one we're looking at. Then Genesis 2:4a, in the Holman Standard, which is an excellent translation, says, these are the accounts, or the generations of the heavens and the earth when they were created, in the day that the Lord God made earth and the heavens. Some people say this moves into Adam and Eve in the garden. No, they were already created. It says man and woman were created. The Theological Word Book of the New Old Testament, TWOT. TOLEDOTHS, generations, birth, derivative of yalid, to bring forth. As used in the Old Testament, TOLEDOTHS refers to what is produced or brought into being by someone or follows therefrom. The first phrase of verse 4, Genesis 2:4a, these are the accounts of the heavens and the earth when they were created, refers back to and concludes Genesis chapter 1. It does not refer, as some contend, to what follows, such as a contradictory account of the 6 days of creation, which then allows man to reinterpret, editorialize the Bible and say, see, now this is what really happened, or we had 2 authors of Genesis, and Moses was a split personality. I don't know, just nonsense. Note that the language in chapter 2 does not stipulate that it starts at the beginning of all creation, nor does it portray a rigid chronological sequence as in Genesis chapter 1, nor does chapter 2 refer to generations of humankind. It could be generations or accounts of other kinds of creation. You have generations of cars. They're not human. The phrase, these are the generations of the heavens and the earth, which includes the word heavens, does not procreate humans. No generations coming from man appear in Genesis until well into chapter 4. Far from the specific context of Genesis chapter 1 and 2 to which this word might refer. So you editorialize, you have to really rewrite. Excuse me. All right. Not easy during these days, is it? Keep in mind that non-living things can be correctly described using the word generations, TOLEDOTHS, as well as living things. For example, a fourth-generation Ford Thunderbird. I don't know if they have them anymore. When the word generations, TOLEDOTHS, does refer to generations of mankind, there are names of specific men linked to it. Not so in Genesis chapter 2. The only progenitor stipulated there is Elohim as God. There are no fathers and sons. Marvin Lubenow states in Bones of Contention, that's a great book, the lexicon defines TOLEDOTHS as history, especially family history, or something associated with origins. This would mean that the term is concerned with ancestors rather than descendants. It also suggests that the phrase looks back to the narrative rather than looking ahead to what follows. The first use of TOLEDOTH in Genesis 2:4, namely, these are the generations of the heavens and the earth, clearly establishes that this reference at 2:4 is back rather than ahead. There is simply nothing following Genesis 2:4 that deals with the heavens and the earth. They don't give birth to people. In 1936, P.J. Wiseman wrote a book entitled New Discoveries in Babylonia about Genesis. Wiseman asked the question, how is the information recorded and how were documents formulated in ancient Mesopotamia, which was the geographical context of much of the book of Genesis? The heart of Wiseman's contribution to the problem of the formulation of Genesis was his insight into identifying the TOLEDOTH phrases in Genesis with ancient Mesopotamian colophons. A colophon is a scribal device placed at the conclusion of a literary work written on a clay tablet, giving, among other things, the title or description of the narrative, the date or occasion of the writing, and the name of the owner or writer of the tablet that preceded, not followed. Hint: it is not surprising to the student of ancient Eastern customs that many of their literary habits were precisely the opposite of our own. For instance, the Hebrews commenced their writing on what is, to us, the last page of the book and wrote from right to left. In ancient Mesopotamia, Iraq, it was the end and not the beginning of the tablet which contained the vital information regarding date, contents, and ownership or authorship. This custom was widespread and persisted for thousands of years. Therefore, Genesis 2:4a, TOLEDOTHS, refers back to what was produced or brought into being by God, namely the heavens and the earth in the 6th day of creation. Henry Morris writes, the first chapter should have been marked in the middle of verse 4 of Genesis 2. It is there that the first TOLEDOTH, generations, appears. These are the generations of the heavens and the earth when they were created. This statement represents the subscript or signature, as it were, of the author of the section that has gone before. Since there was no human author, no man having been present to observe the creation, no human name is attached, as in the case of the other 10 TOLEDOTH that occur later in Genesis. Only the Lord's God's name, is attached. The account tells us about not the genealogical and historical records of some patriarch, but about the genealogy of the universe itself, of which God is progenitor, creator. Are we clear on this? So, once completely created and perfect in God's eyes, but then contaminated by the fall, the heavens and the earth are now devolving and deteriorating. We don't see much evolution. We have deterioration and more simplification, not more complexity. Present processes are of conservation and disintegration, not the creative process of innovation and integration. Henry Morris states again, the passage in Genesis 2:1-3 is, of course, a marvelous, assertive summary that God had now completed his work of creating and making all things. 4 times it is emphasized that God had finished his work, and 3 times it is emphasized that this included all his work. These points are stressed because it is vitally important for man to realize that the present processes of the cosmos that we observe today are not processes of creating and making, and therefore it would forever be impossible for him to understand about the origin of things apart from divine revelation. Both the ancient pagan evolutionists and the modern scientific, so-called, evolutionists continue over and over to repeat the same folly, trying to explain the origin and basic meaning of things in terms of a self-contained, closed universe, an attempt which is absurdly impossible. The 2 universal laws of thermodynamics reflect creation's devolution and deterioration. The present processes of the universe are, without exception, processes of conservation and disintegration, as formulated in the 2 universal laws of thermodynamics. The first law of thermodynamics is one of energy conservation. Energy is neither created nor destroyed. The second law of thermodynamics can basically be stated that in spite of this conservation, the first law, the energy available for useful work doesn't decrease, so that the universe can be said to be running down. Especially the sun's energy is dissipating via heat into the universe, so everything is devolving, not evolving. Scientific observation of today's processes, including conservation and disintegration, indicates that such processes could never have produced life, the earth, and the universe. The processes of the creation period, on the other hand, were processes of innovation and integration, creating and making, which are exactly opposite. Science can deal only with present processes, to which alone it has access. It should be completely clear to all who are not willfully ignorant that universal processes of conservation and disintegration could never produce a universe requiring almost infinite processes of innovation and integration for its production. Now, since we cannot observe what happened at the creation of the universe, we are left with God's revelation to mankind in the Bible of what happened. I say, okay, I'm not omniscient myself, but what I've studied so far is far superior to anything that we've produced in contradiction or even harmony, and so I'm going to stick with the Bible until something better comes along. So far, I'm pretty confident nothing better is going to come along. Therefore, if we really want to know anything about this creation period, other than the fact that there must have been such a period to produce the universe, a fact certainly required by the implications of the 2 laws of thermodynamics, then such knowledge can be acquired only by divine revelation. It's not available, and we have divine revelation that's trustworthy in the Bible. And that is exactly what we have here in this marvelous first chapter of Genesis, the divinely revealed record of the creation and formation of all things. How long it took, what the various events and divisions were, what the order of development was, the relations of the various components, and all the other data which man could never be able to determine for himself through his own scientific observations. This completion of God's work of creation is also stressed in the New Testament. So we have support, and they don't contradict. Amazing work. Hebrews 4:3, 4:10, 11:3, Ephesians 3:9, and so on. We continue on, Genesis 1:31 to 2:4, the generations of God's creation, closing out chapter 1. So on that, the Genesis account of creation referring to chapters 1 and 2 is not mythological. Some people try to push that. After all, the critics' points of contention are done away with, one by one. There still remains one major contention of the critics. Okay, we don't have neither popular opinion nor prior existence of similar accounts, and that invalidates the Genesis account or any account. They say, these contenders, that the creation story in the Bible is derived from mythological sources. As a matter of fact, most of the world maintains that the